President Biden will hold his first bilateral meeting with Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador today. The two will discuss joint cooperation with migration, development efforts in southern Mexico and Central America, and the COVID-19 crisis. President López Obrador says he will push Mr. Biden for a massive immigrant labor program that could bring as many as 800,000 migrants to the U.S. each year. The Biden administration is already scrambling to address immigration issues. Over the weekend, it moved to expand the government's capacity to house migrant children. This is in response to a sharp increase in unaccompanied minors who are crossing the southern border. CBS News immigration reporter Camilo Montoya-Galvez has been following this story. He joins us now from Las Vegas. Camilo, welcome. Why is there this increase in border crossings of unaccompanied children?
Hi, good afternoon, Tanya. Yes, the number of unaccompanied migrant children being taken into U.S. border custody has been rising for months now, but the numbers have sharply increased in February this month. Just last week, Tanya, more than 2,000 unaccompanied migrant children were taken into custody along the U.S.-Mexico border. On several days, more than 400 children were apprehended within 24 hours. So that is a major shift in the numbers that we are currently seeing. And to answer your question about what is driving this uptick in apprehensions of unaccompanied children, I think it is important, Tanya, to allow our viewers to understand that U.S. law requires border officials to transfer unaccompanied migrant children to the U.S. Refugee Agency within 3 days. The Trump administration last year suspended that process, arguing that a public health authority allowed the government to expel these children without any due process or an asylum interview and not transfer them to the refugee agency. The Biden administration, Tanya, has made a policy decision to reverse that policy and to allow these children to undergo their immigration proceedings here and to be transferred to the U.S. Refugee Agency. So that policy decision is partly responsible for this uptick in children being transferred to the U.S. Refugee Agency. And as we have reported, the Refugee Agency is now struggling to house this influx of migrant children.
And so what steps is the Biden administration taking to address this lack of housing space? And what are the conditions what are the conditions like where these children are being kept at the moment?
Those are great questions. Last week, the Biden administration reopened a Trump-era temporary influx facility to hold unaccompanied migrant teens. More than 200 teens have been transferred to this facility, which, unlike shelters run by the Refugee Agency, this facility is not subject to state child welfare requirements, which has elicited some criticism from some advocates. But the Biden administration argues, Tanya, that this facility is a much better setting for unaccompanied children than Border Patrol stations, which were largely built to house and detain adult migrant men for short periods of time. Kids in Border Patrol stations don't have beds. They often have to sleep on the floor. They are held in cinder block cells with one toilet, and these Border Patrol facilities have become notorious over recent years because of overcrowding. So that is what the U.S. government is trying to avoid: children having to spend prolonged periods of time in these Border Patrol facilities.
Absolutely. And I also want to ask about President Biden's meeting with Mexico's President Andrés Manuel López Obrador. He's calling for a, quote, bracero-style immigrant labor program with the U.S. Can you explain for our viewers what that means exactly? And is President Biden likely to agree to such a deal?
Sure. So this would be a return to U.S. immigration policy dating back to before the 1940s, in which Mexican temporary laborers were allowed to cross the border to temporarily live and work in the U.S. While we don't know whether the Biden administration will agree to such a program, it signaled that Mexico is now thinking that the Biden administration will have a completely different approach to migration than the Trump administration. As we discussed several times, times, Tanya, the Trump administration really focused on tightening and restricting asylum at the U.S.-Mexico border and deterring migrants from coming here. And the Biden administration wants to address the root causes of migration, which one of them is poverty in Mexico and Central America, and as well as violence. And this is an avenue for people to come here legally to work. That is a significant step that the Biden administration and Mexico might agree to. And in a press conference today at the White House, Secretary of DHS Alejandro Mayorkas said that he's also looking to reinstate a program that was ended by the Trump administration that allowed migrant children in Central America to request refugee status or parole status to come here and reunite with family in the U.S. as an alternative to the dangerous trip to the U.S.-Mexico border. So the Biden administration is definitely exploring legal pathways to migration instead of just deterrence policies, which were the centerpiece of the Trump administration's border policies.
A lot on the table, a lot of new considerations. All right, well, Camilo Montoya-Galvez, thank you so much for joining us.